Hello, I'm Kelly Ott,
And I'm Lara Wakefield.
and today on Focus Point, we're going to be talking about pet peeves during the present level performance. Actually, it's the present level of academic and functional performance for your students' IEP meeting.
We used to call it the plop. Remember back in the day? And then it was the plep. And then it became the present level. We just started calling it that.
PLP.
And now it's the PLAAFP, the PLAFP. That doesn't really flow very well, does it?
No. Sounds like something naughty.
Yeah. What a great way to start your IEP with that little word. It's kind of strange. And usually when you start off in the present level, the first thing is what they call the impact statement and how the disability affects the child in their educational program. And I don't necessarily like starting with that. What about you?
No, I think if we could start with a little humor like we just did, it would be so much better. It would set much better tone for the meeting. We start out with the negatives. I mean, you're just there to get down to business and talk about all the things that kids can't do. And I think that's very negative. I prefer starting with strengths. We kind of joked last week about not introducing yourselves, but I think when you start and you talk about who you are and what your role is, it starts the meeting as well, but also letting the parents know why you're even meeting. It's the annual IEP review or whatever the purpose of the meeting is. We're here to discuss Johnny's progress this year. He's made some great progress and there's some really great things going on. And we noticed that he has some really good strengths and talk about those. And then talk about the impact statement. Just because it's the first thing on the form doesn't mean it's the first thing you have to talk about.
That's a good point, because I do think people get stuck in that structure, since it's the first thing on the form, usually, at least in the IEP meetings that I typically go to in the districts, it's usually the first thing instead of the strengths. And it sets a negative anxiety tone when you start there.
Well, think about hearing all the things your child cannot do. I mean, I think about, going in and being bombarded by, 4 or 5 different people around a table telling me all the problems that my child has. And
you already know what they are.
I live with that kid. I know, and it's just.
And then it's in paper, it's in black and white looking at you.
But to hear people talk about it and say it directly to you, it's very overwhelming. And I think that for a lot of parents, it just adds to their anxiety and their stress and their lack of esteem. I mean, I feel like parents take that.
They do, because your child is a reflection of you. And so it can be painful to hear all of that. One time I was in a meeting and they do the facilitated IEPs here in Missouri. I think there are about 35 states that do it. And the people that get trained on that, one of the requirements of the training is that in the very beginning of the IEP, when people go around to introduce themselves, they say their name, their role, and then they say how they know the child and one positive strength or something they like about the child. And that's how they start the meeting in those facilitated IEPs. And I love that.
It's great.
It just starts off in such a more peaceful way.
And if you're like me, I always have the students present. So, no matter what age, my preschoolers sit in on my meetings. So, if you're going to start the meeting by saying all the things the child can't do or all the problems the child has, it's different with the child present. So I think it's really important to talk about the good things. And I can look at the student and say, hey, we had fun today. Can you tell your mom what we worked on, or what are you working on in speech? Show your mom your progress reports. And my students, they take their own data. So I take data too, but they can pull out their data and they can say exactly, look, mom, I'm at this 3 days in a row, or whatever. They can tell their parents what they're working on, which is huge. How many times have we been seeing a kid for a whole year and the parents like, my kid says he doesn't go to speech? Like, oh my God.
Right. Exactly.
So, get your kids involved in that meeting too. I mean, the atmosphere and the tone of the meeting will be so much different.
And they start to develop their self-determination skills at that early age.
Hmm.
And the earlier they develop it, the better it will be as they get older.
Right.
So those are the issues with the beginning of the present level and the strengths. What are some things in the strengths section, though? Sometimes you have a little bit of pet peeves there. It just in that little.
We need to be really mindful about some of the comments that we write in the strengths section. There's nothing more horrible than seeing something about the child's physical appearance or,
Oh, the child is attractive. I've
Mhm,
seen that a
yeah.
lot.
Would you say the child is ugly? I guess that
Right.
wouldn't be a strength, right?
Right.
I
Right.
mean, I think we try too hard to qualify qualities and not really talk about their true strengths. They should be
Mm-hmm.
skill-based
Mm-hmm.
strengths. They can be, you can talk about interests, and that's a
Mm-hmm.
good thing. I mean,
Right.
motivators are
Mm-hmm.
important,
I
but
agree.
it shouldn't be the only thing that you're mentioning. And if you're having a really hard time coming up with strengths, you need to be talking to the other team members because that teacher
True.
surely has something positive say, or the parent. You should be getting parent input.
Yes.
It really needs to be inclusive, not
Right.
just your piece.
Right.
But I think that should be discussed in those meetings.
I agree. And parents do have a lot to share on the strengths of their child. And I think sometimes parents can bring that information to the table, but if they aren't asked in the meeting, a lot of parents aren't going to volunteer it.
Mhm.
So I think it's good, like you said, to be mindful of asking everyone's input into that part. So, and I also think be mindful if you only have one strength listed. I try to have a few more because when you only see the child is attractive and that's it, and no one has anything to add, that kind of says a statement in
Right,
itself.
right. Or the child gets lots of attention from her peers.
Well,
Is
yeah, the
that
way
really a
that's
strength?
worded, yeah, that way
Yeah,
that's worded is ambiguous and can be taken a lot of ways.
right.
That's true.
Right.
And then usually what's next in the present level is the progress since the last IEP. And that's usually just a summary of where they are with their
Mhm,
goals. And then I guess, the results from the evaluation is kind of basically just dumped in from the
mhm.
evaluation summary. So there's usually not too many issues there, but
I would also add, just with the tracking the progress, that section of the present level, I think it's really important. We, as practitioners, we get really, and educators, we get really bogged down with looking at their goals, what their baseline was, what their progress currently is, and we just want to, copy and paste that part in there.
mm-hmm.
Really, sometimes you need to be thinking about the child and what are some of the functional gains that they've really had
Mm-hmm.
related to that goal area. Maybe you're
Oh, good
seeing
point.
things in the classroom, or the teachers noticing things that have changed or improved, not necessarily a percent, but maybe the child is getting, um, more interest from peers because they can understand him or her better.
That is such a
Or,
great
there's
point. Yes.
other things that can demonstrate functional progress or gains without being necessarily a part of that data keeping
Right.
portion
Instead of
of
it
the
just being a
goal.
reporting of percentages or
Hmm.
whatever, you could talk about that they've seen some kind of social change or
Right.
whatever.
We
Yeah.
forget, we get so bogged down with the academic side and relating everything to that, to the learning, to the academics, that really it's educational impact. It's academic and functional goals. So we really need to be thinking about what are some of those bigger picture life skills, soft skill, functional things that are going on that are changing through the course of this IEP cycle for that student.
I think that's great. Any other ideas on that from present level?
Oh, there's lots of things. I think that we get really used to, it's so much paperwork and it's so
Uh-huh.
much documentation, and I see a lot of cutting and pasting from previous IEPs. And,
Mm-hmm.
really, when you think about it, it should be just a mini biography of that student for that year. it shouldn't look the same. I mean, sure, some things are still going to be similar, but really need to be mindful of what has this child looked like for the last year? Where do we want to go for the next IEP cycle? And not just copying and pasting, from when the child came in at 3 years of age, and now they're in high school and it's the same. Johnny is so friendly.
Right, exactly. It should be a new chapter, like you're reading a book. It should be a new chapter, and it progresses and develops and evolves into who they really are in that present moment today. Good point.
So those are some of our thoughts about the present level of academic and functional performance. What are some of your thoughts?